They called it organizational optimization, which is corporate speak for we're too cheap to pay experienced people what they're worth, and too lazy to figure out who actually keeps this place running. 15 years. I gave that company 15 years of 60-hour weeks, missed family dinners, birthday parties that turned into voicemails because some client crisis needed my immediate attention, and the kind of loyalty that borders on Stockholm Syndrome, complete with the psychological dependence on a place that never quite loved me back. They repaid me with a conference room ambush and a severance package that wouldn't cover my mortgage through Christmas, let alone the emotional therapy I'd need to process being discarded like outdated software. The meeting invite came on a Tuesday morning at 8:47 a.m. Subject line, Workforce Alignment Discussion, which is corporate translation for your professional execution, has been scheduled. Please report to the gallows at 11:30 sharp with your dignity and any remaining illusions about job security. I should have seen it coming, should have read the tea leaves when they hired that consulting firm with the pretentious name Vanguard Strategic Solutions, run by a 28-year-old named Colton, who wore sneakers with suits called Everything a Paradigm Shift, and had the kind of confidence that only comes from never having failed at anything meaningful. Yet his LinkedIn profile read like a fever dream of buzzwords: synergistic ecosystem, architect, disruptive innovation catalyst, human capital optimization specialist, which apparently meant he specialized in ruining lives with PowerPoint presentations, and a smile that belonged on a toothpaste commercial. But I trusted them, believed in the company mission, believed that 15 years of institutional knowledge meant something more than a line item on a budget spreadsheet to be optimized away, like expired inventory. I believed that showing up every day solving problems other people couldn't even identify and building relationships that generated millions in revenue would earn me something more than a folder full of transition documents and a security escort to the parking lot. I walked into that conference room like I was attending a quarterly review. Instead, I walked into my own funeral complete with mourners who'd helped dig the grave. Colton was there, of course, perched at the head of the table like a vulture in Allbirds, flanked by Jasmine from HR, who had the emotional range of a compliance manual and spoke exclusively in legal disclaimers, and my direct supervisor, Knox, a man so spineless he once apologized to a printer for jamming it, then apologized to me for witnessing him, apologized to an inanimate object. They had folders prepared, neat little stacks of paperwork that probably took their intern longer to organize than they spent thinking about the actual human impact of what they were about to do. The folders were color-coded, because apparently even professional assassination requires proper documentation and aesthetic consistency. Colton cleared his throat and launched into what sounded like a TED Talk about synergistic realignment and operational efficiency delivered, with the enthusiasm of someone who genuinely believed he was improving the world, one layoff at a time. While I sat there watching 15 years of my life get reduced to bullet points on his MacBook Pro, which I noticed still had the Apple stickers on it, because of course it did. The gist was elegantly simple in its cruelty. My role was being consolidated into a broader strategic framework, which meant they were firing me and giving my responsibilities to 3 junior associates who would collectively make less than half my salary while producing a quarter of the results. But hey, at least they were optimizing for the future. Whatever that meant in a world where experience was overhead and institutional knowledge was just another legacy system to be deprecated, Colton explained, with the patience of someone teaching kindergarten, that this wasn't about my performance, which had been consistently exceptional according to every review I'd ever received, but about right-sizing the organization for maximum agility in an increasingly dynamic marketplace, which translated to, we found cheaper people who don't know enough to push back when we make stupid decisions. I didn't argue, didn't scream, didn't flip the table, though. God knows I wanted to. I just sat there nodding like a reasonable professional while internally calculating how many vacation days they owed me, whether the non-compete clause was enforceable in this state, and how many different ways I could explain to my mortgage company that organizational optimization had optimized me right out of my ability to pay them. Jasmine slid the severance package across the table with the enthusiasm of someone handing out parking tickets. 4 months base pay, continuation of benefits through March, and a non-disclosure agreement, thick enough to stop a bullet and heavy enough to crush whatever remained of my faith in corporate humanity. The NDA was particularly detailed, prohibiting me from discussing company strategy, client relationships, operational procedures, vendor partnerships, proprietary methodologies, or anything else that might constitute competitive intelligence. Basically, they wanted to buy my silence along with my absence, ensure that whatever I knew died with my employment, and that any future employer would get a clean slate version of me, stripped of everything that made me valuable. I signed it all. Because what choice did I have? Fight a legal battle I couldn't afford over a job that apparently didn't want me or take the money, and figure out what comes next, while my savings account slowly bled out like a patient on life support. I chose survival. But survival and compliance are two very different things. As they were about to learn in the most expensive way possible, they walked me out that afternoon, past the cubicles where my former colleagues avoided eye contact, like I had something contagious past the break room, where I'd heated up 10,000 lunches and listened to 20,000 complaints about management decisions I'd tried to shield them from, past the motivational posters about teamwork and innovation that suddenly felt like satire, written by someone who'd never actually worked in an office. My personal items fit in a single cardboard box. A coffee mug from the company retreat 3 years ago, a picture of my dog wearing a birthday hat, and a mechanical pencil set my sister bought me for my 10th work anniversary, back when I still believed loyalty was a two-way street. The security guard was polite about it, professional, even commenting on the weather like we were old friends, bumping into each other at the grocery store. But there's no dignified way to carry your career in a banker's box, while everyone pretends not to watch you leave. And that should have been the end of it. Should have been a clean break, a fresh start, an opportunity to find somewhere that valued experience over youth and loyalty over cost savings. But here's the thing about institutional knowledge. It doesn't just live in your head. It lives in your contacts, your relationships, the trust you've built over 15 years of solving problems and putting out fires, the kind of trust that can't be downloaded from a shared drive or transferred through a transition document. The clients didn't know I'd been restructured out, and why would they? Their account management portals still worked, their deliverables still arrived on time, their dedicated support line still got answered. They had no idea that the person who actually understood their business, the one who remembered their pain points and special requirements, and that time they needed an emergency turnaround during a holiday weekend while their own staff was skiing and Aspen was no longer there. They had no idea because companies like mine go to great lengths to maintain the illusion of continuity, even when they've just blown up the foundation and hired a construction crew of interns to rebuild it with craft glue and good intentions. Take Blackstone Industries, for example. Our biggest client, worth roughly $2.7 million annually in recurring revenue, plus another $1 million in project-based work and emergency consulting. I'd been their primary liaison for 8 years, knew their CEO, Victoria Blackstone, well enough that she'd invited me to her daughter's wedding, knew their seasonal fluctuations, their regulatory concerns, their unspoken preference for Thursday afternoon status calls, because that's when their board met on Fridays, and Victoria needed talking points that made her look like she had everything under control. Victoria trusted me, not the company, me specifically, because trust isn't transferable. It's earned one conversation, one crisis, one successful project at a time. And trust, once earned, becomes the most valuable currency in business, more valuable than contracts, more powerful than legal agreements. Because trust makes people want to work with you, makes them call you first when opportunities arise, makes them defend you. When others attack and trust, unlike stock options or salary increases, can walk out the door whenever you do. And now, some junior associate named Pierce, who probably thought CRM stood for Customer Relationship Magic, was supposed to waltz in and maintain that relationship with a script and a smile. Pierce, who'd been hired 3 months ago straight out of business school with a degree in theoretical management and a minor in PowerPoint presentations, was going to manage a relationship that had taken me 8 years to build through late-night crisis calls, weekend emergency fixes, and the kind of personal attention that turns vendors into partners. I gave it 2 weeks. 2 weeks for the cracks to show for the new team to realize that account management isn't just about sending invoices and scheduling check-ins. It's about understanding that when Victoria says she needs something expedited, she means her board is breathing down her neck and failure isn't an option. It's about knowing that their IT director, Harold, hates phone calls but responds to emails within minutes, and that their procurement team needs everything documented in triplicate, not because they're bureaucratic, but because they got burned by a vendor 3 years ago who tried to change terms retroactively and cost them a 6-figure settlement. It's about remembering that their fiscal year ends in June, not December, and their budget approvals require board sign-off, which happens monthly unless there's a holiday or someone's on vacation, which there always is, because rich people take more vacations than everyone else combined knowledge. Like that doesn't live in the company database. It lives in the minds of people who care enough to remember, and apparently caring was no longer a billable skill in the brave new world of organizational optimization. The call came on a Wednesday morning, 2 weeks and 3 days after my restructuring. Victoria Blackstone herself, not her assistant, not Pierce the golden child, not some middle manager with a title longer than his attention span, but Victoria calling my personal cell phone, the one I'd given her years ago for emergencies. Her voice was tight controlled, the way it got when she was managing a crisis behind the scenes while projecting calm confidence to everyone else. "Where the hell are you?" she said without preamble. "I tried calling your office and got transferred to some kid who didn't know our account. History couldn't answer basic questions about our current projects and had the audacity to ask me to repeat our company's legal name like we haven't been partners for 8 years. Like we haven't generated enough revenue together to buy his entire education twice over. I was sitting in my kitchen, still in pajamas, at 10:30 in the morning, because unemployment has a way of dissolving your relationship with business hours and replacing it with a strange temporal limbo where days blend together like watercolors in the rain. I explained carefully about the restructuring, the organizational optimization, the exciting new opportunities that apparently didn't include me, despite 15 years of creating exciting new opportunities for everyone else. Victoria's silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Then she spoke again, and her voice had shifted from controlled to dangerous, the way a storm shifts from brewing to breaking. "They didn't tell us," she said each word carefully, measured. "They said you were transitioning to a new role internally, that Pierce would be working under your supervision. They told us nothing was changing except for some back-end improvements that would enhance our service experience. They lied. And here's where it gets interesting, because Victoria Blackstone didn't just run a successful company, she'd built it from nothing in an industry dominated by men twice her age who underestimated her at their own peril and consistently discovered their mistake when she outmaneuvered them in board meetings and stole their clients with superior service and genuine relationship building. She understood. Betrayal. Recognized it, could smell it from 3 time zones away, and she had zero tolerance for people who thought they could manage her with corporate speak and condescending smiles. "They restructured you out," she said. It wasn't a question, because Victoria Blackstone didn't ask questions she already knew the answers to. Didn't they? I confirmed, and they expect us to pretend nothing changed. Expect Pierce to magically know 8 years of relationship history. Expect us to trust someone who clearly doesn't understand our business, let alone our partnership exact, I said, feeling something dangerous start to coil in my chest, something that had been dormant for 15 years while I played the loyal employee. "Exactly how much of our account did you personally manage?" she asked, and I told her the truth, all of it. From initial contract negotiations, to project oversight, to crisis management, to those late-night calls when their systems went down and they needed someone who understood their infrastructure well enough to coordinate a fix without escalating to emergency rates that would have cost them thousands. I was their institutional memory, their advocate, their translator between what they needed and what the company could deliver, their shield against corporate bureaucracy, and their bridge to solutions that actually worked. And now I was sitting in my kitchen in pajamas while Pierce fumbled through client files trying to figure out why Victoria Blackstone rated special treatment and personalized service, when the database clearly showed she was just another account number in a very long list. Victoria was quiet for a long moment, the kind of silence that usually preceded major business decisions or declarations of war. Then asked the question that changed everything. "Are you allowed to freelance?" And technically, yes, the non-compete clause prohibited me from working for direct competitors in the same industry, but said nothing about independent consulting, especially for existing relationships that predated my termination with clients who had specifically requested my services. It was a loophole big enough to drive a semi-truck through, assuming you had the right lawyer to navigate the fine print and the moral flexibility to exploit a contract that had been designed to exploit me. We set up a meeting for Friday afternoon, not at some corporate office with glass walls and performance anxiety, but at a coffee shop downtown Neutral Territory, where we could speak freely without worrying about who might be listening or recording or taking notes for future legal proceedings. Victoria arrived 10 minutes early, wearing the kind of focused expression that usually preceded major business decisions, and carrying a folder thick enough to be concerning she didn't waste time on pleasantries or small talk about the weather. "They're already screwing things up," she said, sliding the folder across the table like she was presenting evidence in a murder trial. Pierce missed 2 deadlines. Confused our project timelines, somehow managed to double bill us for services we'd already paid for last quarter. And when I called to complain, they put me on hold for 20 minutes, then transferred me to someone in billing who had never heard of our account and seemed personally offended that I expected them to know what I was talking about. I opened the folder inside, were email chains that made my blood pressure spike, project updates that demonstrated a fundamental misunderstanding of Blackstone's business requirements, and invoices that looked like they'd been generated by someone who thought accounting was a creative writing exercise, and client service was an abstract concept rather than an actual responsibility. It was worse than I'd imagined. They weren't just failing to maintain the relationship. They were actively destroying it through a combination of incompetence, negligence, and the kind of arrogance that comes from believing your own corporate propaganda about operational efficiency. Victoria leaned forward. "Here's what I'm thinking. We're not happy with the service we're receiving from your former employer, but we're locked into contracts through next year, unless we can demonstrate material breach of service agreements." She paused, letting that sink in. "What if we hired you directly as an independent consultant to audit their performance? Identify service gaps and recommend improvements. You'd essentially be quality control for your old company's work on our account, documenting every failure, every missed deadline, every moment of incompetence with the kind of detailed precision that makes lawyers smile and executives sweat." The beautiful irony wasn't lost on me. They wanted to pay me to document how badly they were screwing up the client relationship I'd spent 8 years building. It was like being hired to perform an autopsy on your own murder victim. Except the victim was still alive and the murderer was about to get a very detailed report on exactly how they'd committed the crime. We shook hands on it that afternoon. Victoria would contract me through Blackstone's professional services division, which gave them legal cover, and me a legitimate income stream while I figured out my next move. The consulting agreement was clean, specific, and generous enough that I could afford to take my time planning the next phase of my career without having to settle for whatever desperate opportunity presented itself. First, I started the following Monday, armed with access credentials Victoria had maintained for me and a mandate to evaluate service delivery across all active projects with the kind of thoroughness usually reserved for IRS audits and crime scene investigations. What I found was worse than incompetence. It was systematic dismantling of everything that had made the partnership successful. Pierce had reorganized their project management system to match the company's internal structure rather than Blackstone's operational needs, which meant deliverables that used to arrive organized by priority and deadline now came sorted alphabetically by project code, a change that demonstrated complete ignorance of how Victoria's team actually worked and created chaos that cascaded through every department he'd canceled their weekly status calls, claiming efficiency gains while simultaneously increasing email volume by 40% because he didn't understand that Victoria preferred verbal updates for complex issues and written summaries for routine maintenance. The result was information overload without actual communication. Most damaging of all, he'd recommended cost-cutting measures that eliminated services, Blackstone hadn't even realized they were receiving things like priority queue placement for support requests, proactive monitoring of their account, health, and the kind of relationship management that prevented small issues from becoming expensive problems. Pierce saw these as unnecessary overhead. I saw them as the difference between a client who renewed their contract without question and one who started taking calls from competitors. My first report was 30 pages of documented failures backed by timestamps, email screenshots, and comparative analysis of service levels before and after the restructuring. I sent it to Victoria on a Thursday afternoon, and she called me that same evening, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who'd just been handed a loaded weapon. "This is exactly what we needed," she said. "We're calling an emergency review meeting next week, and we want you to present your findings to their leadership team in person." I almost choked on my coffee. "You want me to present my own former employer's failures to their leadership team? The same people who'd restructured me out to save money." Victoria's laugh was sharp and entirely without mercy. "Oh yes, we do see Blackstone. Industries represents 12% of their annual revenue. We're not just a client, we're a significant stakeholder. And stakeholders get to ask hard questions about service delivery, especially when we're considering whether to renew or explore alternative partnerships with vendors who actually understand what client service means." The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday, same conference room, where they'd restructured me out, same table where Colton had pontificated about paradigm shifts and operational efficiency. But this time I walked in as Victoria Blackstone's consultant, not their former employee, not someone they could dismiss or ignore, but a professional representing their second-largest client, armed with documentation, and the kind of quiet confidence that comes from holding all the cards. Colton was there looking significantly less confident than he had 3 weeks earlier. His paradigm shift apparently having shifted into damage control mode, flanked by Pierce, who kept glancing at me like he couldn't quite believe what was happening, and Knox, my former supervisor, who had developed a nervous tic in his left eye and kept checking his phone like he was expecting a call from a headhunter. Jasmine from HR clutched her tablet like it might shield her from what was coming. Victoria made the introductions with surgical precision, allowing just enough pause after my name for the recognition to sink in, for the color to drain from Colton's carefully maintained tan. She explained that Blackstone had contracted me to perform an independent audit of service delivery quality following several concerning incidents that had raised questions about their partnership's future value. Then she turned to me and said with a smile that could have cut glass, "Please share your findings." The presentation lasted 47 minutes. 47 minutes of documented evidence that their organizational optimization had optimized their biggest client relationship right into the ground. I walked them through response time, degradation, project management failures, billing errors, and communication breakdowns, each slide more damaging than the last, each example more specific, more undeniable, more impossible to explain away with corporate speak. Pierce tried to interrupt, twice offering explanations that only made things worse. Knox stared at his hands like he was praying for a natural disaster, and Colton's paradigm shift had apparently shifted into full panic mode. By the time I reached the final slide, the one showing Blackstone's declining satisfaction scores correlated with my departure date. The room felt like a morgue with better lighting. Victoria stood up slowly, like a judge preparing to deliver a verdict. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying the weight of 12% of their annual revenue, "this audit confirms our concerns about service quality degradation. We'll be issuing a formal notice of deficiency under Section 12 of our service agreement, which triggers a 90-day remediation period." She paused, letting that sink in during this period. "We expect documented improvements in all identified areas, monthly progress reports, and direct access to senior management for escalations. Failure to meet these requirements will constitute material breach of contract, giving us grounds for immediate termination and pursuit of damages." The silence that followed was profound. Knox's eye tic had evolved into a full facial spasm. Pierce looked like he'd been slapped with a fish, and Colton was furiously taking notes, like he could somehow write his way out of the crater they'd just discovered beneath their feet. Victoria gathered her materials with the calm efficiency of someone who'd just won a chess match they didn't see coming. "We'll expect your remediation plan by end of week," she said, then turned to me. "Excellent work, as always," and just like that we walked out, leaving them to contemplate the wreckage of their optimized future. The remediation plan arrived the following Friday, 6 pages of corporate speak that essentially amounted to, "We promise to do better, trust us." This time they offered to reassign Pierce, provide additional training, and implement new quality assurance protocols, all of which missed the fundamental point that you can't rebuild 8 years of institutional knowledge with a training manual and good intentions. Victoria read their response over lunch at the same coffee shop where we'd first discussed the consulting arrangement. "This is insulting," she said, sliding the document back across the table. "They're offering Band-Aids for a hemorrhage treating symptoms while ignoring the disease." She leaned back in her chair, studying me with the expression she usually reserved for complicated business decisions. "Here's what I'm thinking. Blackstone is growing. We're expanding into 3 new markets over the next 18 months, and we're going to need consulting support for vendor management, compliance oversight, and strategic partnerships. Someone who understands our business, our standards, our expectations." She paused. "Someone we trust." The offer was everything I hadn't dared to hope for a senior consulting role with equity, participation, flexible scheduling, and a client base that would let me build something new while leveraging everything I'd learned from 15 years of experience, plus the deep satisfaction of knowing that my former employer would watch their second largest client walk away because they'd optimized out the one person who could have prevented it. We shook hands for the second time in 3 weeks, but this handshake felt different, permanent, like the beginning of something rather than the end. The following Monday, I submitted my final consulting report to Blackstone, along with a formal recommendation that they terminate their existing vendor relationship due to unresolvable service quality issues. The report was copied to their legal department procurement team and board of directors, creating a paper trail that would make any contract dispute swift and decisive. Tuesday morning, Victoria called their CEO directly and delivered the news that Blackstone Industries would not be renewing their service agreement, effective at the end of the current term. She was professional about it, courteous, even explaining that they'd simply outgrown the partnership and needed vendors who could scale with their expanding requirements. She didn't mention the audit, the failures, or the organizational optimization that had started this whole cascade. She didn't need to, because sometimes the most devastating blow is the one delivered with a smile and a firm handshake. The impact was immediate and catastrophic. 12% of annual revenue doesn't just disappear. It leaves a crater that affects everything, from quarterly projections to staff bonuses, to the kind of confidence investors need to see before writing checks. They scrambled, tried to salvage the relationship offered, concessions that would have been laughable if they weren't so desperate. Colton personally called Victoria 3 times in 2 days, pitching paradigm shifts that sounded increasingly like panic. Knox sent rambling emails about lessons learned and process improvements that arrived months too late. Pierce, the golden child who was supposed to optimize their future, was quietly reassigned to internal projects where his incompetence couldn't reach external clients. And me. I was sitting in my new office at Blackstone Industries, Director of Strategic Consulting, with a team of 6 and a mandate to build vendor relationships that would actually scale with their growth plans. The irony was perfect. They'd optimized me out to save money and ended up losing more revenue in 1 quarter than my salary would have cost them. In 5 years, they'd traded institutional knowledge for fresh perspectives and discovered that fresh perspectives without experience are just expensive mistakes waiting to happen. They'd restructured their way into irrelevance while I restructured their client base right out from under them. The best part, though, was the email I received 6 months later from Knox. My former supervisor, now apparently responsible for new business development, he was reaching out about potential partnership opportunities, wondering if Blackstone might consider giving them another chance to earn their business. His message was formal, professional, and completely oblivious to the fact that he was essentially asking me to recommend the company that had fired me to the client who'd hired me because they'd fired me. I let him wait 3 days before responding, then sent a polite decline, explaining that Blackstone's current vendor relationships were performing exceptionally well, and they saw no need for changes. In the foreseeable future, I CC'd Victoria on the response, because some moments deserve witnesses. 15 years. They took from me 15 years of loyalty experience and institutional knowledge that they optimized away in a conference room meeting that lasted 37 minutes. But institutional knowledge works both ways. It's not just what you know about the company, it's what you know about the clients, the relationships, the trust that exists between real people, not corporate entities. And when you fire the person who holds those relationships, you don't just lose an employee, you lose everything. They know everyone they know, and every reason those clients had to stay loyal to you, instead of following the person who actually understood their business. They called it organizational optimization. I called it the most expensive 37 minutes in their company's history. Thanks for watching you. Corporate restructuring survivors hit that subscribe button, unless you're Colton, in which case you're still trying to paradigm shift your way out of the hole you dug.